All right, so Katie and Erin, could you just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your school?
Sure. Katie Rinke. I am the principal at Fancher Elementary. We are a 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade school in Mount Pleasant Public School District.
Okay.
Then Erin King, principal at McGuire Elementary, also a 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade building in Mount Pleasant. And Katie's kind of on one side of town, I'm on the other side of town. So we're both doing one of the same things and just doing it across town.
Okay, perfect. So Katie, you were part of the first cohort that worked with the area STEAM gym. And Fancher already was very well established in MTSS when we started that work. Tell us a little bit about what your goals were that first year.
So I think the big goals for us were to really focus in on the behavior component of MTSS. And we realized we needed to firm up our documentation process of how we track behaviors and where that data goes, input it, and then tracking the data, using our data to determine what plans or interventions we were going to put in place for students, more to Tier 2, Tier 3. But then at the same time, strengthening our Tier 1 of PBAS, so having those common expectations and letting that data, where we had a common system to input and funnel that, but using that Tier 1 data to then know what we need to reteach across the school, where we're in trouble areas, a certain grade level, and where we need to reteach PBS expectations.
Cool. What do you feel like went really well that first year?
The team worked hard, my staff bought in, so I think number one is getting that staff buy-in, explaining the why and the importance behind it. Because for us, we focus on that documentation part, so we used an actual sheet of paper that we called our blue slip. That did require a little more work on a teacher, but in the long run, it benefited both the teacher and the students because we were making sure they were getting the resources and intervention support they needed, especially if we had a teacher who was maybe trying to handle a lot of their behaviors themselves. It kind of leveled the playing field a little bit because we know teachers can have different capacities for how they manage behavior in their classroom runs. So it really leveled the playing field, had common expectations, supported those teachers who were strong with challenging behaviors in students, and then also just firmed up how we documented things and put plans in place. So having that common system for everyone, having that common language, and then just a system which we use Illuminate to track all of our data in, having that platform to go back in and see our students' data year to year now. We were using Illuminate before, but not as intentional and not as systematic across our building. So I think just getting us all on the same page, and like you said, we had a pretty good PBS system in place before, but this allowed us to firm up some areas where we could strengthen even more. Just our common expectations, how we teach that, what resources we give teachers to teach those expectations. So I think there were a lot of things that went well, but I think that data collection was one of the biggest things for us.
Great. What about unexpected challenges in that first year?
So kind of in the flip side, thinking about documentation, that became more work for our staff, our teachers, our admin, we have behavior interventionists, so that behavior team. So we started to drown a little bit in paperwork with these blue slips that we call. And so ultimately, we had to go back as a team in a building to determine what needed to be documented on this slip, what was class managed, what needed to be documented on the blue slip. But we found ourselves drowning in paperwork at the end, which took us away from running those interventions, having the FaceTime with students. So this year, we've shifted and we put everything right into Illuminate that I think is working better for all parties. And we did tweak our intake form with the help, of you, Shane, and how Illuminate it gathers that data. But it, is always a work in progress. We did have people pilot that blue slip at first. I think that was really beneficial to have a few people pilot and give feedback before we rolled out to the whole staff. But yeah, so bumps in the road with the data collection because that can feel cumbersome.
Sure.
But in the end, it ultimately drives our decisions, and that's the message we continue to have with our staff, that we want to make sure our data is driving our decisions we make.
Well, and even though, Katie's school was a model school for last year in Tier 1. And so even though you're a model school now, it's still lots of work to do.
Oh, yeah, I think we'll get to that in a little bit, but just using that tiered fidelity inventory and reflecting on, okay, in this area, we're doing great things, now let's move into tier 2 or tier 3 or somewhere where we scored not as high, what can we continue to develop and add and focus in on, so.
Sure. Erin, things were a little different at McGuire when we started in year 2. Talk to us a little bit about how it went.
So initially at McGuire, I had come over there mid-year, so trying not to change a lot of things in the beginning, but also really trying to pay attention to, okay, knowing we need expectations for students, and we need to all be following the same teaching system, being provided with resources so that, this classroom is teaching the same system that this classroom is. But honestly, there weren't even really solid expectations at McGuire. It was kind of like, this classroom is going to follow this classroom is going to follow this. So I realized there were some things that we did have to change right away. So quickly, there was an established MTSS team, but not really an established PBIS team. And those two need to work together. There's kind of an ebb and flow. So really quickly, after that first year coming in over in November, knowing that would have to change for the following school year, I just kind of started making a list. Then we started working with Jim that next school year, and that really started impacting what we were doing because we were able to find, okay, the first thing we need to do is set expectations and have everyone follow these expectations. So that started in January, which the rollout is hard in January, but it went really, really well. And then, so year 2, which is this year now, we were able to start right away with a great set of slides that everyone was able to follow, a schedule of, okay, what are we teaching when and how are we teaching it, with being intentional and providing this list of resources, books and videos and all of those things. And then really looking at our MTSS system that wasn't quite established, especially not separated for academic and behavior. And what are we going to offer teachers prior to even coming to MTSS as a team? What do we notice that teachers need? And then how are we going to provide that for them? And of course, we started collecting data, and that wasn't really done prior. And it's a complete 180 from where we started. It's been awesome.
One, you brought up expectations, which, I know there's a very funny story we can share a lot. But we got into the work with Jim and decided, I think in October, that we were going to go away from what was currently there to a whole brand new set of expectations, because what was there was Q, but it wasn't explicit for students, right?
Nobody could teach it.
Nobody could teach it.
Nobody knew it. Kids didn't know it. One of the expectations, our previous acronym was MAGIC. And I remember going home talking to my family, like, I have to talk about this with kids. So, M8, the G was generous. And my, at the time, 9, 10-year-old said, well, how are you generous in the bathroom? Like, actually, we don't really want to do that. So I didn't teach that part. But it was really difficult. And I think I got quite a bit of pushback at first from the PBIS team. So like I said, you can't change some of those things in the beginning. You have to have that staff buy-in, and over time, seeing that, man, we really can't teach these expectations, because how do you, look like a Mustang in the hallway? Do you gallop? So we were really fine-tuning our words with your help and with the help of Jim. Jim talks a lot about what's the low-hanging fruit on that tiered fidelity inventory. So what can you look at right away, and what's going to give you the most bang for your buck? And expectations, so setting a matrix in every location, looking at the verbiage and looking at what is going to help a kid see what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it in every location, and then following up with, when you don't see that, okay, what do you do? What does your teaching system look like?
Absolutely. So it looked a lot different between the two schools, what we're saying. Even though you're both 3-5, both in Mount Pleasant,
Sure.
we just started from very different places, but we're really close to the same place now,
Yeah.
I would say. Tell us about either one of you can go first, tell us about your experience with the TFI. What do you think about that, and how does it guide your work?
So the TFI is really, tiered fidelity inventory is really daunting when you look at it at first. And we noticed as a team, so we have a PBIS team and then an MTSS academic and behavior that are kind of split. And some of those members are in both. So we really looked at it as a core behavior team and broke down, okay, what number are we? Are we a 0, a 1, or a 2 in all these different categories? And then made a list of what do we need to do in order to get to a 1, or what do we need to do in order to get to a 2? And we said low-hanging fruit lots of times. Okay, what is that easy thing that we're already doing, or we might just have to shift a little bit in order to get to a 1 or a 2. And then we've since made a list of, okay, at the end of last year, what do we want to focus on for year 2 of this cohort that would move us in the positive direction on the TFI. So it's guided pretty much everything we've done, whether it's data collection, including parents, including student voice, including staff. How do we communicate out what we're doing? What do we communicate out on our social media or in newsletters? How do we bring in subs? We really looked at our sub teachers. How do we make this easy so that they could put up a slide or put up this easy presentation when they come that would help them know, okay, our expectations are safe, respectful, and responsible, and what does that look like, and what can I expect from students? It's guided our work with individual students too, because are we including them in the plan, or are we just making a plan that does not include them? Are we looking at data that guides that plan? The tiered value inventory breaks down the parent component a lot, and I don't think at McGuire we had thought of some of those things prior, so that was a huge focus for us this year. How do we collect all of that data and then share it with the family, and then help them to have say in what this plan looks like too. And then do we meet back after 6 weeks? We weren't doing that prior, but now we're meeting back after 6 weeks, or we're at least looking at the data and seeing if we need to meet, or do we continue with the plan as is. We know exactly how many students are tier 1 now, our tier 2, our tier 3. We know what the plan is, we know the revisit date. I mean, I could rattle off, okay, we've met this many times on this student, and we could not have done that prior. And the TFI really helps guide our work and be very specific and intentional in what we need to do and when we need to do it.
Great. What do you think, Katie?
So, like Erin said, I think cumbersome at first, but really good to break down to see where you're at in each tier as a building. And so, like Erin said too, just having those goals, seeing at the end, you're reassessing yourself in the spring and how the year went, and maybe having 1 or 2 target areas for that next year. For Fancher this year, I would say we're really focused in on sharing the data and using the data. We worked so hard to have a system to collect it, and then what are we doing now to use that data to communicate with our families, like Erin said. Like, hey, at Fancher, here we're working on ownership and respect as we lead up to this field trip or coming off a winter break, and then communicating with our staff. We're seeing an uptick in instances in the hallway for safety. So we need to reteach that. We're going to incentivize that more. That's something we've done this year too, targeting how we incentivize more at a tier 1. So at Fancher, we have our Fancher Falcons and Class Dojo, but we started an additional tier 1 school-wide system where we were having raffles weekly. Like the target this week was safety in the hall or safety in the playground. And then sharing the data with our staff, just here's our data in places of learning, recess, cafeteria, here's the number of incidences we've had, suspensions, really also honing in, I think, just working with Jim, decreasing that exclusionary data as well. And so we know we want kids in the classroom learning, how do we keep all kids learning and safe? So using that data to drive our decisions and how we communicate with staff is really important. So whether that's at PLC monthly, I know I've had it in my weekly reminders. We talk about it at a staff meeting. But we're doing all this data collection. I don't think we're using that data always. Maybe in our individual team meetings, like Erin was saying, we meet every 6 weeks on students. We have a meeting half day coming up next week where we'll meet on a number of students based on data from Illuminate, and we'll recheck some plans, and some students will be new. But beyond those individual students, I don't think we're using it in a way that could really change behaviors and impact the building as a whole. So that's been our focus through the TFI process. So,
what tips would you have for somebody looking to get started in this work right now?
I think initially, just finding your key players for a strong team. I think we both have strong teams in our building, and getting the right people on your bus for those teams. And I think we both have some really expert staff members and educators in our buildings and utilizing them. And like Erin said, that merge of MTSS, PBS, we were kind of working in silos before in merging the two because it is a lot of the same work. But I think getting that team together and probably starting with your TFI to see where you need to start, because I think maybe for both of us, where we thought we needed to start wasn't actually where we did. I think maybe we felt we were further along at Fancher in some of those informal behavior plans with tier 2 interventions, but through this process we saw some gaps like, oh, we could go back to tier 1 and strengthen this up and make sure we're all on the same page as a building.
Well, and even being okay going slow to go fast. I'm not great with going slow to go fast. I can, make a list of some different things that I know we need to do, and there might be 20 different things, and okay, let's do it. Well, that's not a great idea. And not everybody is wired that way, and there's purpose in going slow so that you can go faster later. And I think that's what we found. We found that we were going really slow the first half of the year, even then with implementation in January for us when we were starting our new expectations. We were still going slow, but then man, you look at the end of the year and all that has been done, and okay, now we're able to go a little bit faster. And knowing that there's going to be times that you're going to go slow again, and that was kind of us this fall. And now it feels like we're in a great groove again because we were collecting the behavior data, we had started sharing it, but we weren't responding to it, if that makes sense. So giving yourself time to go slow so that you can be intentional, because responding to that behavior data is huge. You see there's 4 more kids that are having issues this month, or maybe just concerns this month that have not popped up before. Why is that? And having the conversation with everyone versus just 2 people on the team, involving your whole team the whole time. Why do we think that is, that maybe there's these struggles happening now than they weren't before? What's different? And what could we do to kind of head that off, rather than waiting until the teacher comes to the team and says, I'm concerned about this kid. So really being intentional about what your direction is, and then how you get there, and being patient as you get there.
That's great. Anything else you guys would like to share?
Overall, I just think this whole process has changed our building. It is really just inspiring to see, I read an article years ago that was talking about just every kid needs an adult in their life that is hopelessly in love with them for no reason at all. Well, my own kids, of course I'm in love with them. They're my kids. But what about this kid? That's somebody else's kid. And I think that is our purpose. That's our why. That's why we're doing this. We're doing this because we're choosing these students. We're choosing that they matter. We're choosing that they matter enough to put all this time in and put all this work in, because someday they're going to get to be the best version of themselves because of the time that we're putting in. So that's our hope and our why. So that would be my advice. Just remember that why. What's your purpose? And chase it. Whether it is easy or hard, some parts of it are going to seem unattainable, but slowly, as a team, we'll be able to get there.
And I can add to that working with both your teams over the last few years has been incredible. And you guys do have absolutely incredible teams and made some really, really great progress.
Yeah, and I think for us, I think it's some of the best work you're ever going to do.
Yes.
We know we can't get to academics until we address behaviors, communication, and I think it's some of the best time and resources and blood, sweat, tears that we've spent, and we've seen impact on kids. So, yeah.
And having an outsider perspective too, like you and Jim, has been really helpful, because sometimes you are in this work and it's hard to think of something new when it's the conversation that you had before. So I think that's been really helpful too. You and Jim have been instrumental in all the stuff we've been through, so that's been huge.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you guys for joining us, ladies.